Hi guys, it's Kelly here, and I am back with another video. This is actually my last video as a March guest designer for Stamping Bella, so I'm a little sad about that. It's been a fun month. So today I'm using the Cave Kids backdrop and the appropriately named the Walrus, the Polar Bear, and the Penguin. I kind of wanted to switch up the background a little bit. So I am doing a 1-layer card. I'm stamping down these cute little critters, and then I'm going to mask them before I stamp the Cave Kids background. Now, you might notice that these are all kind of cold weather animals, and the Cave Kids backdrop is like a mountain with a stream and some grass. So I decided to switch it up, that I'm going to change the way that the background looks. The only thing that I'm going to need to do when I stamp it is I have to erase the lines for the stream because that is not going to make sense in my background since it's going to be like the ocean with like polar ice caps. So I'm going to take a baby wipe and just wipe off that area of the stream. There's also a large negative space in the middle. I didn't have any issues stamping it, but if that bothers you, you can certainly wipe it off. So once that's done, I've also stamped another one of these so that I could mask the sky. I wanted to do some Distress Oxide blending up top there. And honestly, I probably would have done it for the water too if I wasn't kind of like hand drawing the modifications in. And I had a good way to mask it. So here I picked out kind of like a sunrise. Here's why I picked the colors, besides the fact that they're like beautiful. I picked the colors because I knew the walrus, the polar bear, and the penguin were all going to be neutrals. And then they were going to be in snow, another neutral. So I need to have some way to add color to my card. So I started with the squeeze lemonade, then moved to the fossilized amber. And I'm just kind of working in like a dome shape so that it will look like a sunrise. The reason I even put the fossilized amber in there is because I was nervous about the squeezed lemonade blending into the carved pumpkin, which is kind of a stronger orange color. And then on the very edges, I'm going to put the picked raspberry simply because I love carved pumpkin and picked raspberry together. So I'm doing this once. I always do my distress ink blending twice. I know I tell you guys that all the time. Very rarely do I ever leave it in, but in this one, the difference between the colors was so noticeable. I wanted to make sure that you saw me do it twice, just so you would know that this is in fact what I actually did. So once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and remove the mask. I did want to just tell you that part of my mask on the corner was catching. I just fold it around the back, and that seems to work for me. I'm also going to remove the mask for my little critters here, and then I'm going to take a pencil and start changing that background. So, like I said, they're typically found in snowy areas, these particular animals. So I decided that I would create kind of like some islands of snow in the ocean and then have them sitting on kind of like a snowbank with the mountains and the sunrise in the background. So I always do it with pencil first, and then once I'm happy with the way that it looks in pencil, I go back in with a Copic Safe pen. In this case, I'm using the EK Success journaling pens, and I actually picked a very small nib. The reason I picked a very small nib is because if I want to make some slight modifications later with a thicker black pen, I can do that because this one's smaller. So from there, we're just going to hop on into the Copic Coloring. I'm sure you noticed this is a fairly long video because I Copic colored the entire thing, and it's time consuming. Not only is it regularly time consuming, but I had many interruptions in this card. So here I'm just kind of color blocking in the water. This is, for me, just a good way to kind of get a visual. It's also a really good way to tell when you need to refill your markers because that BG11 was dying on the vine. I really needed to refill that thing. So from there, I'm just going to start picking. You saw I picked a bunch of blues, blue greens. That's my preferred, I guess, color palette for water, but you could certainly go more navy or more traditional blue with a little bit more purple in it. This has a tendency to lean itself toward the green side, and it's just because that's my preference for blue. I'm using the tip of the marker and doing kind of like some side swipes of flicking. This is just to basically create some depth, some dimension. It's kind of hard, and this is something that if you're going to try a background like this, even if you just try the water part of it, make sure that you're taking some of the lines all the way up to your characters. Otherwise, the water is going to look funny behind it. That can be a little bit challenging to make sure that you don't get any blue, green, whatever on your other parts of your background. I just, you know what? I just do what I do, and that's why they make the colorless blender. That's how I feel about that. So once I started to get into the darker colors, I did keep them more into, don't mind that's one of my many interruptions right there. That's a packet of oatmeal my kid is throwing onto my coloring because he decided it would be a fantastic idea to get up at 6:30 in the morning when I was still filming this card. Joyous day, let me tell you. And because he just wants to be on camera. There was absolutely no reason for him to put the oatmeal right where I was coloring. PPS. Anyway, leave the darker color toward the back. It's going to add some depth. Any darker colors are going to look farther away. The lighter colors will look closer up. So that's why you put the dark in the back. Now, water is typically blue because it reflects the sky. And so I did want to, I guess, have some reflection in there, but I still wanted the water to be blue. So what I'm doing is I'm just going in and doing some very light flicks of all three of the colors that I have in the sky. So I'm concentrating the yellow in the center where it would mirror the sky, and then from there out to like a lighter orange color, and then like a meat, I don't know, I used an R32. It is a red, but it does look pink. I think it's actually called peach, which is a lie. But nonetheless, you get the point. I'm just using little flicks of color to, and if you're nervous, I guess, about it being too green, like with the yellows and the oranges, you could certainly take the colorless blender and black out some areas to be highlighted and then fill in the color. I just didn't think it was necessary. Speaking of the colorless blender, I'm going to take this in and clean up all of the areas where I got blue where I didn't want it. Most of the time, honestly, it wouldn't have mattered if I was doing a green, like Green Hills background or a beach background. The brown would have covered that. But because I am doing snow, there's not, white is white. Like, it's not covering anything. So once I had the water done, I'm going to go back in and do the mountains. I usually like to use blue violets for my mountains. That's just me. But you can see basically the way that I'm shading them is the light source is in the center, okay? That's the sun is our light source. And so on the left-hand side, because the sun is on the right, the mountain will be lighter on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, because the sun is on the left, the mountain will be lighter on the left. So each time I'm just adding shading up from the bottom where there wouldn't be any light. And then I'm leaving that lighter edge. And I combined my blue violets with some violets. Specifically the V20 family is very similar to a blue violet. It is a much duller color. It ends in 5. So like it's just not as bright. It's just not. So anyway, with the darkest color, which is the BV04, I'm really only adding that just to the base. And then the mountain that is the small one in the center, I added it up a little higher there because it is set further back than the other mountains. And then I'm just going to do the same thing that I did before to blend that out. You know, if you guys watched any of my videos before, you know I go lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest. That's how I feel like I get the best blend, and that's what works for me. Isn't necessary for you to do as long as you're happy with your blending in the end. Once I have all of this blended out with the lightest color, I'm still leaving kind of that white edge on the side. And the reason I'm leaving that white edge is because it would have a little bit of a yellow glow. I chose a very light yellow for this. I don't want it to compete with the other areas I'm going on, but I did want to include it because I feel like, I don't know, it just it helps make the scene. So for my couple of trees that I have in here, I'm using a YG03 as my base, but then I'm moving into the G family just for them to be a little bit darker. This was one of the things I struggled with. So I was like, there's trees. And it's not just evergreen trees. This one over here kind of looks like a palm tree. Ultimately, I decided that I didn't care. I was thinking about like maybe I should do like some melty snow, and then I was like, it's going to be like melted polar ice caps. I'm going to trigger people on YouTube. I'm not interested in doing that. I'm just going to do straight snow with this one random oddly placed tree. I'm cool with it. So for the trees, basically I'm doing kind of like the same quote unquote backlighting is what they call it. But I'm being very loose with this backlighting because I don't want to black out my little critters. I just don't. They're way too cute to cover up. So I'm not doing that. I am, however, going to make my tree on the left darker on the left-hand side since the sun is to the right, and the tree on the right-hand side lighter to the left since the sun is on its left-hand side. That's just, if everything was like center focused, you would have light and dark areas on both sides of it. But because, you know, those mountains are tall, they're going to block some of that sunlight. I will say the evergreen on the right-hand side would probably be lighter on the tip. My darkness just got away from me a little bit. I don't really feel like it was that huge of a deal. I don't think anybody's going to get this card in the mail and be like, oh my gosh, that evergreen tree should have been so much lighter at the top. This was colored terribly. And if they do, I'll never send them a card again. So I don't care. For the snow, I am going to use my cool grays. And I'm basically going to do the same thing that I did with the mountains. I'm going to add shading from the bottom on up. Because again, their tops will be the lightest area. That would be the white. That's going to be the only place that the light catches as well. The only difference is for my snowbank that my little critters are sitting on, I'm actually adding the shading from the top down. Here's why. This is the little creative license. First of all, they're going to cast a shadow. So they have to have some shadow underneath them in order for that to make sense. But because it is snow, I do want still to have some white areas. So I decided it would be easier to keep the white area along the bottom edge of the card so that it still looked like snow than to try to mess around with any of my shadows. So that's why ultimately I decided to do that. That shading is a little bit different. Because it's supposed to be caves don't own the kids. It's not plural, Kelly. Cave kids backdrop, because it is supposed to be set in like the grass. You know, these little boulders would traditionally be brown. I'm just treating them like big blocks of snow. That's what I'm doing because I live in Ohio and I've seen big boulders of snow like this. Unfortunately, pretty recently, we had a terrible snowstorm last weekend. And I'm sincerely hoping that that was the last one that we're going to have, because right now I'm deciding whether or not to take my snow tires off my car. And I feel like Ohio at one time or another in April will in fact dump a bucket load of snow on me, and then I will not have any snow tires, and I'll be sad about it because I'm already nervous driving in bad weather. I'm a nervous driver, period. But anyway, so I did bring in a C7 just for the underneath the critters and underneath those two little boulders there. And then I'm just going to blend everything back out with my lightest colors. I did make a little bit of an adjustment later. We'll talk about that when we get there. So since I have the C markers out, I'm going to move on to coloring. Oh, I'm lying. I got to add the little glow. I got to add the yellow glow. And so I just did that to the snowbanks and then also to the two little boulders. They're sitting up higher. They would catch a little bit more light. And this one boulder on top there, I put the yellow all over, and it shouldn't be because that boulder would be blocking the yellow from getting on the underneath of the snowbank. But anywho, now that all my yellow's in place, I'm going to go ahead and color the rest of the things that I need to be white, which is mainly just going to be the walrus teeth and then the penguin's belly. It's going to look fairly dark right now because there isn't any other color next to it. But don't let that deter you from using some of the darker colors. I only go out to a C5, but there's plenty of people who go all the way out to like a C7 when they're coloring white. Here's where I made that little bit of an adjustment to the snow. I was worried that my characters being white and the snow being white, that there wouldn't be enough of a difference. So I took one of the lighter blues, I think it was the B00, and just added that to the snow and then used my colorless blender to blend that out. I picked a few bright yellows, oranges to color in my little penguin's beaks and his feet. Here, basically just doing the same thing, starting with my lightest color. You probably don't need to do this one twice because it's such a small area. I just, I do what I know. That's basically the only reasoning I have for doing that. If ever you feel like an area is too small to use multiple colors, then just don't. Like if you're worried about it bleeding out, just don't do that. So in order to color the black, I am doing C3 is going to be my lightest color, but that's really only going to be the areas that I'm going to go over with the yellow marker. So just like his little flipper, wing. I don't know what it is on a penguin, I'm not going to lie. That's up in the air and then kind of like the top of his head. So I am leaving just a tiny little white border on both of the areas that I plan on making yellow. And then the underneath where his feet are, that's going to be solid black. I keep going over it. Like I said, I just do what I know. So I keep going over it with the other colors, but it's completely unnecessary. I could have just colored the thing in black when I got to the black and not even worried about it. But you will note that now that we are adding in the black, it is his belly is definitely looking whiter. So again, don't be afraid to put in a little bit of those darker colors as long as you leave some white area in there, and just put in the shadows. It is going to look white. Don't worry about it. White still has shadows. So from there, I'm going to move on to this little polar bear. I love the way he slouched down. His little belly is so adorable. I decided to use some pinkish reds for his little pads on his feet and his ears. Again, I know that I've said this before in the other Stamping Bella videos, but Elaine, I think, does all the coloring for their packaging, and she's amazing. But they give you, if you have no idea how to color an image, if you have no idea what it's going to look like, the wonderful thing about their images is it's already colored on the package. So if you have no clue, no idea where to start, you can start there. And I think she made the pads of his feet peach, like a flesh color. But I decided to go with a little bit more pink because I got the pink in the sky. So to color him white, instead of using the cools, I'm using the warm grays. If you are new to Copic Coloring or you're just starting, I only own the cool grays and the warm grays. I don't own the neutral and the toner grays. I don't think they're necessary. That's just me. I had a friend who had all of the markers, and I did, for comparison purposes, kind of line them all up and see whether or not I felt like I needed them. And once they were all swatched out, I was like, yeah, I don't need these. So I'm never going to buy them. So anyway, adding the shading to him, I'm adding a little bit of shading behind his nose, definitely behind his belly, and on the inside of his belly where it's next to his feet. And then to add a little bit of texture to him, you kind of have to be careful because you will get some bleeding if you oversaturate the paper. I'm not worried about it because I'm trying to get some fuzzy texture on him. I'm going to go in with the colorless blender, and I'm going to do a bunch of little circles, a bunch of little scribbles. And I'm going to do that all over everything that I've colored. And this will create some modeling, which will make him look fuzzy. Instead of just, a penguin is slick. Like they don't have fur the way that God created them. Their fur that's on them is very slick down. It's very smooth. Same thing with a walrus, except for their little mustaches. But a bear is fuzzy. And so I wanted there to be some difference in their textures. For, you saw me go back in with the colorless blender. I did have some bleeding where the top of his belly should be the lightest part. And I did have some bleeding where the shading from above his belly got on there. I just went back in with the colorless blender and cleaned it up. I didn't have any issues. Moving on to Mr. Walrus here. I picked some cooler browns just because I felt like that's what made sense, I looked at pictures of walrus. Is it walrusi? Walruses? Plural of anything that ends in S ends in I, doesn't it? Walleye? No, that's a fish. What? Okay, anyway. I Googled a picture of a walrus. That's where we're going with this, folks. And they tended to be a cooler brown. They weren't very warm. So that's how I picked the ones that I did. I went with the E40 family. For the shading on him, his belly is clearly going to be darker. It's set back. His arm that's over his little buddy's leg, that's going to be darker. And then I did add some shading to his face so that his muzzle would stick out, being a little bit of a lighter color. So the only thing that I thought about doing that I didn't end up doing was giving him some like heavy whiskers with like a pen. And because I thought, they have those real thick mustaches. That's why, they name styles of mustaches. Did you know that? There's like all these different names for them. And one of the guys I worked with had the full on walrus mustache. That's why I know it has a name. But so I think it would have been super cute to add like little mustache to the walrus, but I didn't do it. So I added a little bit of glow to my polar bear, and then I'm going to go back in, and I always outline everything. That's just how I roll. That's what makes me happy. Big, bold, black lines. And so I am going in with a slightly larger nib than I used for the parts that I drew in. And then I kind of messed around with the sentiment a little bit. I think it's super cute. It says from all of us, and they're all, like cozied up. And I'm just going to make sure that it's straight. So I ended up using just the mask that I used for the background because it was already so huge of a piece. And I just tore it into strips and stamped it down as I needed to. I only ended up having to stamp it twice before I had it perfectly straight. And then once I was satisfied that it was straight, I'm using Simon Says Stamp black ink to just go ahead and stamp that down. In an area, I stamped it in the water so it wouldn't compete with any of my other black lines. Using some clear Wink of Stella on all of the water, and then anywhere that the light touches, like Lion King, anywhere that the light touches. Just because I thought that, it would be shimmery, the little light, because they're typically wet. So that's it. That is the whole card. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you to Stamping Bella for having me this month, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.